Welcome to Make Your Mark podcast, where guests share their experiences, insights, and tactics to help you accelerate your business. So building, scaling, and monetizing your business is made easier. And I will be your host, Kay Suthar. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Make Your Mark podcast. And oh boy, do I have a special guest for you here today. Now, his name is Craig Andrews. He is the principal ally and founder of marketing agency Allies for Me. Using a proven method that mimics the stages of courtship, Allies for Me helps companies find strangers and converts them into, get this guys, high-paying customers. Now, a first-time offer is like a coffee date that accelerates high-ticket sales. And if you're not sure what that means, well, today, in this episode, Andrew is going to be explaining to us what all of that looks like, what it all means, and how to put it all together. Please welcome to the stage, Andrew. Oh my God.
Kay, thank you for having me. This is so much fun. You say, hey, let's just have a conversation. So this is the time to start. Let's just have a conversation as we're doing this. You know, I was on a podcast once, and the host called me Howard for half of the podcast. And
wow.
And I'm sitting there, we're talking, and and I don't want to be too disruptive. I'm like, okay, how do I set this straight? And after he called me Howard a couple times, I kind of pause and I think, you know what? Let me tell a story. And I was like, and so I tell this story. I was like, and the person said, Craig, and blah 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 blah. And I was hoping that he would pick up on that. I was like, oh, I've been calling this guy Howard. Let me try calling him Craig now. And then like 2 minutes later, he calls me Howard again. And I'm sitting next to him. We're recording live. And his show notes, I'm looking at his show notes, and big letters at the top of his show notes is my name. And so finally, I just point at his show notes. He's like, oh, have I been calling you Howard? And he's like, I said, yeah. And so, but here's the thing, Kay, life doesn't always go the way we planned. Things happen. Mm-hmm. Isn't that the case? Things happen.
It is, yes. And it's funny that you say that, right? Because we've spoken off camera, and you've told me some really mind-blowing things already, right? Like I wish I already clicked the record button while you were talking, because you're giving so many golden nuggets already. But you were telling me about your journey, and I'd love for you to share with our audience today a little bit about what your journey looked like to get to this point that you are right now here today and have built this business. How did it all come about?
I promise it was nothing resembling a straight line. And when I was in high school, I didn't have a single teacher that ever accused me of being a model student. And,
okay.
Yeah. And so when my grades were at a level that no university that anybody had ever heard of would accept me, I thought, well, let me try something a bit different. I'm going to join the Marine Corps. So I went in the Marines for 6 years, which was a blast. It was a lot of fun. Fortunately, it was a 6-year period where we only had one war, and it was a very short war. It was truly a blast. And when I got out of that, I always thought I wanted to build things. I wanted to design things and create new things. And I thought, well, how do you do that? Engineers do that. That's what engineers do. They build and design things. So I get out of the Marines, go to engineering school, not just once, but twice, go to graduate school, land a dream job. I was designing mobile telephones. I had a design engineering job, which few engineers get. And it was my first job out of college. I was designing cell phones, mobile phones in the 1990s, when it was still kind of a new and emerging thing. I was doing it for Ericsson, which used to be one of the big three mobile phone makers.
Right.
And I was bored to death. It turns out engineering does not reward creativity. If you're a creative person, don't go into engineering. That's not who they're looking for.
Interesting.
Surprising.
How does that work? Because you would actually think it would be a creative role to be in.
Yes. And so are you familiar with the Myers-Briggs personality test?
No, please explain.
Okay. So it was, it was some work based off Carl Jung, and it breaks down different parts of the personality, and you usually see it represented in 4 letters. The second letter is intuitor versus sensor, and it's about how you perceive the world around you. The more intuitive people see the data or see the actions, but they say, wait a minute, there's something else. There's some hidden glue that's tying this together. The sensors, they just kind of see what's there, and their perception of the world is based on what they can see, taste, smell, touch, the senses.
Right.
Overwhelmingly, engineers are sensors. The people who do best in engineering are sensors. And I'm an intuitor, a pretty strong intuitor at that. And then when you combine the other letters, it turns out that I'm a type that's maybe a little bit rebellious, doesn't like the rules, and likes to paint outside the lines. And engineering is not a place where they reward people who paint outside the lines. Now, don't get me wrong. I did very well. I got great performance reviews. I got promotions. Things were going well. But for me to do that, it put me in a place that didn't make me happy. And so I thought, well, let me try something a little bit different. Let me take my technical background and let me try marketing. And so I started marketing semiconductors for mobile phones.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, when we were talking off camera, you said, we were talking about Europe, and I said I used to go there a lot. Well, I've visited Nokia, Ericsson. There was years ago.
I love when you say Nokia. It's a Nokia.
Yeah. Yeah. But there was even a mobile phone maker in the UK named Sendo up in Birmingham, and it was run by a guy named Hugh Brogan. Crazy, eccentric, rich guy.
Right.
His design. The reason he had this design center in Birmingham was he was trying to lure talent away from London. And as you know, if you're outside of London for more than a year or so, you can't afford to move back.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And so he'd bring them out there and basically try to trap them. And he was doing pretty well, but he was brash. He was bold. And one day he decided to sue Microsoft for IP theft. And I don't know what you know about Microsoft, but they have good lawyers.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure. Right. Okay. So why did you think that would have been a good idea?
I think it was a matter of desperation. So this was back before the iPhone. And and Microsoft was trying to build. Microsoft had a mobile operating system, and they had 2 partners that they were developing it with. One was Sendo in Birmingham, and the other was HTC in Taiwan. And and Hugh accused Microsoft of leaking some of his IP to HTC and giving HTC an advantage.
Right.
And, maybe that happened, but when you sue Microsoft, what was it? Napoleon said, if you're going to kill the king, kill the king. Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so what happened next? Like, how did that go down?
So Sendo is, no more. They eventually sold to Motorola, and Motorola is no more. The whole mobile phone industry kind of went topsy-turvy, and the folks that I was visiting, 20 years ago as customers, many of them aren't even in business or are basically irrelevant. And, the landscape's changed a lot. Now, I've visited some there, I've been in Samsung and Apple and, some of those that are still top of the heap. But anyway, so I did that for a number of years. I was marketing that. It was a great opportunity to combine, sort of my technical background with, some more creative things, which I found fulfilling. What I did not find fulfilling is when the margins compressed and they said, hey, you know how you've been flying coach or business to Asia? We would now want you to fly coach to Asia. And I was going to Asia 4 or 5 times a year.
Oh,
and I was like, no, thank you. I think I'll go do something else. And that's when I started my current venture. And it's funny. There's a lesson in that. At the time, and I'm embarrassed to admit this now, but at the time I thought, I've been really good. I was very successful at marketing in the mobile phone, semiconductor business. Yeah. And I thought, I will go spread some of my genius on the rest of the world.
Okay,
And now when I run into colleagues from the old world, they ask me what I've been doing. I tell them, I say, I've been spending the last 10 years learning how little I know about marketing.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay.
The tools we were using in that world were so limited, barely scratching the surface of the tools that should be in any marketer's tool chest.
Right. Oh, wow. Wait, so how did that make you feel when you actually learned this, right? And found out, hold on, there's a whole different world out there in regards to marketing.
Well, for me, it stimulates me. So one of the traits that you find in engineers is they like to learn. And so for me, there was this new undiscovered world that obviously not only was there room to learn, there was a lot of room to learn. And that was fascinating. And as I dug into it and started understanding more of the deeper psychology of marketing, some of the things that you can do, it's very appealing, and so in many ways, I would say I'm doing more design today than I was doing when I was designing cell phones for Ericsson. But the design I'm doing today is designing systems to change the way people think, and we could get into a deep technical rabbit hole, but basically, our brain, people think of the brain as left brain, right brain. It's really kind of system one and system two. System one's your fast brain. System two is your slow brain. 95% of your decisions are made in the back part of your brain, and they're made instantly. The funny thing is, the only part of your brain that can explain those decisions, that can explain anything, is your frontal cortex. And the problem with that is, if 95% of the decisions are made in the back of the brain, that means the part of the brain that's explaining the decisions only made about 5% of those decisions. And often those explanations come in filled with gobbledygook, things that sort of seem to make sense, but it's actually the brain filling in the gaps for the things that's missing and filling in the gaps incorrectly. And so that's why you have stories like Coca-Cola launching New Coke back in 1984. They asked 200,000 people what tasted best, and they chose New Coke off that. And it was a huge disaster. They had to write off $30 million worth of inventory in the 1980s, which would be closer to $100 million now, because their opinion survey, what is effectively their opinion survey, failed them. And so many opinion surveys fail because they're not tapping in to the right part of the brain when they're asking when they're trying to figure out what they're trying to figure out.
Right, that's interesting. Okay, so but how do you tap into the right part of the brain to make these decisions then, right? Because we don't know this.
We don't know this. So there are a number of ways of doing it. And the back part of your brain, think of it as a high-speed pattern recognition machine. Like I said, the engineer in me is coming out. I'm putting this in engineering terms.
Okay.
And actually, one of my professors in university was one of the world's experts in target recognition back when the Russians were our enemies the first time. And but the back of your brain is a high-speed pattern recognition. It looks for patterns, and it sees a pattern and says, danger, run away, or it sees a different pattern and says, this is safe, run towards it. It's closely tied. It's in the general vicinity of the amygdala, which is like the fastest part of the brain that gets signals to your neocortex to actually start moving you to action. It's kind of the fight or flight part of the brain. But here's probably the best way to think about it. Have you ever been in a conversation and somebody's saying all the right things, but everything in your gut's saying something's wrong? This just does not feel right.
Right. Yes. Yes.
That's your system one. That's your system one. It's picking up on messages. And when you go back, and you've probably done this as well, I think I made the wrong judgment there. As I think about it, I was worried about X, but now I shouldn't be X for these logical reasons. And then sometimes you do that and you find out, no, I actually had a valid reason. I just couldn't explain it. That's what your system one is doing for you. And so a lot of marketing is programming people's system one thinking. And there are a variety of ways that you can do that. One of the ways, do you remember the iPod commercials with the dancing silhouettes?
No, I don't. I don't know if we had that in the UK. Well,
it was a hugely successful campaign for Apple. And basically what it was you would have like a solid colored background, and you would have the silhouette of one or two people dancing to this music. And the only thing that was distinguishable was you would see the white headphone cords with going to the white iPod. Well, one of the things your brain does is when you see silhouettes, your brain inserts yourself into the silhouette, inserts yourself into the action. So the lie that Apple was telling in that commercial was, you can have these groovy dance moves, you just need an iPod.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And your brain just does this automatically. Now, the reality is there's not enough iPods in the world to turn me into a good dancer.
Okay, let's not go down that route then. So you've given us some really good information about how the brain works, like which part works where and all this kind of stuff. But that brings me to a story that we kind of vaguely went through off camera, right? You were in a coma for quite some time, right, Craig?
Yes.
And you got to tell us how that happened, how long you was in there, because you're here today, so it all worked out well, and you still continue to run your business like nothing happened. Right? So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I came down with the Delta variant of COVID. And
yes.
Yeah. And for those that remember, Delta was very deadly. And the basic rule is if you went on the ventilator with Delta, you died. And so I went in the hospital on August 10th of 2021. And I fought vigorously all the way up until August 21st. I would do different breathing exercises. I would reposition my body to, increase my oxygen levels. I was tied into a little oxygen sensor, and an alarm would go off anytime my oxygen dropped below 86%. And as soon as that alarm went off, I'd start doing exercises to get my oxygen back up. And I was doing that really well until August 21st, when they decided to shoot me full of morphine, so much morphine that they later told my wife that I was not competent to make my own decisions.
What? Oh my goodness. Wait, so this was the hospital's fault now?
Yeah.
Oh my word. Okay, so what happened after?
So a few hours after they shot me full of morphine, they called my wife in the middle of the night, woke her up at 12:30 in the morning, and basically coerced her to put me on the ventilator. She heard me in the background screaming, "No ventilator, no ventilator." And she's like, "Well, he doesn't want to go on the ventilator." And the doctor laughed at her and said, "If he doesn't go on the ventilator, he's going to be dead in 24 hours. And she said, "Well, how many people have you had survive the ventilator?" And he said, "None have survived."
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So wow. It was lights out, and it was lights out for me for 6 weeks straight. And even when I woke up, my brain was still scrambled for a couple weeks, and which was kind of an interesting time. It's an intriguing time in hindsight, looking back at it and looking at how I was, things I was processing, how I was fighting for survival, and so forth. But yeah, it was an interesting time.
How did you deal with all of that, right? So you didn't even know it was lights out. You just kind of woke up one day and was like, what's going on here? All that. How do you process what's happened to you? Because I'm sure your wife explained what had happened, and your lights out has been for like 6 weeks. So how do you process all of that?
Well, what appeared to be lights out to everybody else was just me moving into a dream state. And so for those 6 weeks, I had a series of dreams that...
Do you still remember them?
I do. I still remember. Those dreams were my reality. So I remember my dreams as you may remember things that you were doing 2 years ago.
Interesting. Okay, so you're going to tell us what some of these dreams were about.
All right. Well, so let me throw this in, because I'll tell you one of my favorite dreams to tell. But let me throw this in because this is kind of the setup for that dream. When I woke up, it was really interesting. During those 6 weeks, it was lights out for me. My trust in the doctors had plummeted, but my trust in my wife had gone through the roof. And it was really bizarre. The doctors would come to me and they'd, want to do something. And I just said no, because remember we were talking about the backside of your brain, the pattern recognition.
Yeah.
All I knew was I did not trust these people. I didn't trust them. And so they would go to my wife and they'd say, hey, we want to do such and such. And she'd come to me and she'd say, the doctors want to do this. And I'd ask her, is it safe? And she'd say, oh yeah, it's safe. And then I would tell her, yes. And so, trying to figure that out. I mean, it was really interesting how that happened while I was supposedly asleep. And I told you that, my brain was scrambled for the first couple of weeks. These dreams were my reality, and I believed that they were true. And after a few times of me saying something and the folks around me looking at me like I was nuts, I realized what they believed about reality was different from what I believed about reality. Right. And so I called my wife over and I said, I need to tell you some things. And I need you to tell me if these things really happened or not. She's like, okay. I said, were we in a resort in Louisiana? And she's like, no. Now, in hindsight, I'm not sure Louisiana has resorts, but yeah, and she said, why do you ask? I said, well, I was in a resort. I know I was sick. I was convalescing. And this resort had room service. And one of the things I could order on the room service was a young lady would come into the room and spray my face with raw cow's milk. And it would make me feel better.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I just kept hitting redial. Bring me more of that raw cow's milk. And they'd come in and spray raw cow's milk. Because it made me feel good. And a number of other things happened in that dream, but eventually the resort brought my wife into the room. I'd been in there by myself, and they brought her in. They were trying to get me to leave. And I was like, guys, I can't move. So I was aware that I couldn't move. I said, you're going to have to come in and get me. And they kept getting upset. And I was like, then they finally said, let's bring his wife in. And she came in and she put her hand on my left shoulder. And she said, Craig, this is Karen. I'm your wife. It's going to be okay. And when I told Karen that, she sat back and she said, Craig, I said those exact words during your coma.
No way. Wow.
Yeah. And it turns out at that time, respiratory techs would come in my room several times a day, usually young ladies, and they would put a mask of nebulized albuterol on my face. And it would make me feel better.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay, that is mind blowing. That is insane. But that is super cool. Now, how did you transition from what just happened to you here, the experience that you've gone through, and then getting back to business?
So fortunately, my team, so when my mind cleared up and my wife told me what had happened, she told me, hey, your team's been running the business without you.
Wow.
And these particular freelancers reached out to your team and offered to do anything that was necessary as long as you were in the hospital. And I consider that the greatest accomplishment in my career.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So your team, your community all kind of gathered around and made sure that everything was running smoothly until you got better.
It did. It did. And then even after getting home from the hospital, it was another 2 months before I returned to work. I mean, I was having to learn how to walk again. And when people see me today, they can't picture it until I actually show them a picture. It just blows. And they say, Craig, that doesn't even look like you. I mean, I was emaciated. I looked like a POW. I couldn't walk. And just, it was, so it took some time to get back to work. But during that time, my team was awesome, but I also started processing what had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And, it hit me, going back to this thing where my trust in the doctors had fallen while my trust in my wife had gone through the roof.
Right.
And I was thinking, how did that happen? And, I was connecting the dots. A lot of it came down to what people were saying around me when they thought I couldn't hear.
Ah.
And
okay.
It reminded me of a Maya Angelou quote. And the Maya Angelou quote said, people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel.
Mm-hmm.
And it hit me, we do something we do these things called first time offers. If you have a high ticket product or service, we recommend don't sell that immediately. Sell something that's an impulse purchase. There's a number of traits to it. It helps them solve a problem. It's like a little mini project. And what it does is it speeds up the sale of the high ticket offer, and it actually gives you an avenue to raise your prices on your high ticket offer. And as I was sitting around the house recovering after I got out of the hospital, it hit me. I was like, you know what? That's what these first time offers do for people. It's that Maya Angelou quote. When you come alongside somebody and help them solve a problem in their life,
Mm-hmm.
you're impacting how they feel. You're programming that system one thinking, that back part of the brain, and everything about how they view you. And you're doing it by delivering a ton of value for a stupidly cheap price and genuinely trying to help them with no gimmicks, no commitments, no anything. And the magic that happens at that is their view of you transforms. It actually causes the release of oxytocin in their body. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone that bonds baby to mother. And it causes a release of that. And all of a sudden, you are now the trusted advisor, and everybody else looks like the scary outsider.
Right.
And they usually say, hey, this has been awesome. What do we do next?
Interesting. Okay, so tell us a little bit more about this. So there should be a little offer. How little should the offer be, and what does this offer look like? Is it like an ebook, a PDF, like a little mini course? What should that look like?
Yeah, so for B2B, we target the offer being about $497. The reason for that is anybody in any organization with any decision-making authority has authority to spend that. Even if you're talking to the business owner, you want it to be an amount of money that they don't have to think about.
Okay.
You're trying to remove all that from that. If they have to ask permission of anybody, it's priced too high. But you want to deliver a disproportionate amount of value to price. and you went to solve a problem, and I can't stress that enough. It has to solve a problem. So like an ebook or an audit or those type of things, those don't solve problems. So coming in, and that's the real key thing is when you come in and you help them solve a problem, and a small problem, because you want to leave the big problems unsolved because you want them to buy your high ticket offer.
Right.
So, it really varies from industry to industry. And, for instance, we work with somebody in the podcasting industry who, for their customers, the problem they're trying to solve is visibility in high level conversations.
Absolutely.
So guess what their first time offer includes? It includes, one trip behind the velvet rope to access to that, and it actually gets them booked on podcasts as guests.
Awesome.
And you see how and shows them how to start creating these high level conversations with people they deeply desire to talk to. And so that's not an ebook. That's actually rolling up your sleeves and solving something, but doing it on a small level so that once they taste that, they're like, yes, I get it now. And that's the other. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question here then, because there's loads of people that do free ebooks, free guide, free template guides, whatever it is, right? To then, give value for completely free, have them in the email list, and hopefully they will buy the next program, next program. Are you saying that we shouldn't give out anything for free and it should be a paid product at a small cost?
I would say both. So if you think about the stages of courtship, you have an introduction, and you have conversation, then typically, you have coffee, and then dinner, and then commitment. So content marketing, big believer in content marketing. It's worked for hundreds of years. And, I'm a big believer in it. That would be your free content. But the goal of that is to start the conversation. Once the conversation started, that's when, and this is just for the high ticket folks, the low ticket stuff, that I don't think this is probably what you want to do, or you want to do it on a much simpler form. But for the high ticket folks, if you're trying to close a 5, 6, 7 figure deal, you want to get in that conversation, but in that rare opportunity that you get on the phone with them, you don't want to present your high ticket offer. You want to present something that they can make a decision on that day. And you want the offer to be structured so they would actually feel stupid if they said no to it.
Right. Okay. Interesting. All right. So we've covered a couple of things there in regards to paid offers and what it should look like. What are some of the bigger mistakes that you haven't already mentioned that people continue to make and it's so easy to rectify?
The number one is when I talk about this, and I tell them it has to solve a problem, and I actually say, don't do an audit. Inevitably, 30 minutes later, they come back and they say, well, what about we do an audit? And no, because an audit just reveals the problems that are there. It doesn't solve a problem. It just brings, some problems to light. And I'm not saying that can't be a part of it. That can't be your centerpiece. And I actually don't like the word audit. That's a banished term in my world, because I just don't know that many people want to be audited. It's kind of like offering free dental appointments, unless you're somebody, with exceptionally bad teeth. That's probably not, an exciting thing.
No.
So that's one. The other thing, inevitably what happens when I talk to somebody, they immediately start trying to put it together, which is affirming, because they're like, okay, I get the idea. You've just presented something that's true. I identify with it. I'm going to build an offer that's like this. We spend hours following a rigid process that gets us to the offer. And and when they're throwing this out, it's always I never know how to respond because I want to crush their excitement. I love their excitement, but I'm just sitting there thinking, I promise, whatever you just said is not the offer, and because it takes a process, and the core of the process. And I would put this as the second biggest hurdle. The core of the process is getting people out of a mode of selling and into a mode of serving.
Ah, okay. Okay. Now that's a huge difference, but I also feel like business owners that are trying to sell the product, that's the main goal, right? They need to get sales, right? That's what they're looking at. They're looking at the numbers. And so how do you change that mind shift, right? How do you have that mind shift from going from not making sales a priority to actually just serving?
We do these in a full day workshop, full day strategy session. And we spend 2 to 3 hours moving them into a mindset of empathy, just getting them focused on their customer, getting them focused on the pains of their customer, getting them to express their customers' pains in the words of their customers, not their words.
Right. Okay. Okay. I like that. Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah. And what I've found is once I can get somebody to that place of empathy where they are really feeling the pain of their customer, the offer usually comes pretty quickly.
Oh, interesting.
And I know I'm dealing with a real expert by how quickly it comes at that point. Yeah, and I think the fastest was the person that we were helping that's in the podcasting world. As soon as we got to the point, we one of the processes of the empathy is we create a problem statement that the real customer would say. It has to sound like something your ideal customer would say. And then we frame it out and we put a few guidelines up, and say, all right, here are the bounds that you have to operate in. Given these boundaries, if a friend came to you with this problem and you knew they would never be a customer of yours, what would you do for your friend? And this guy just said, oh, that's easy. And he went, bip, 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 bip. 5 minutes later, we had his offer.
Interesting. Wow. Wow. Craig, I know at this point, people that are listening, right, they're like, oh my goodness, I need to connect with Craig. I need to find out how to do this the right way. I need his help. So where can they go to connect with you?
Yeah, so they can come to our website, which is alliesforme.com. That's ALLIES, the number 4, ME.com. And for your listeners, we have a gift. So if they go to that website and then just add / make your mark, all lowercase, all one word, they will get 2 things. One will be a guide that I put together to help them avoid some of the mistakes I've made. And the other would be 23 days access to our course on building first-time offers. The reason we're limiting it to 23 days is not because we're trying to be stingy. We study human behavior, and we know that if we give you unlimited free access, you're going to sign up for the course and you're never going to take it. We want this to change your life. We want this to make an impact in your life. And what we found is when we put that 23-day limit on it, people come in, they put it to work, and they actually do it. And that's our goal. So just go to alliesforme.com/make-your-mark. And if somebody wants to do something more, there's a link on our website that says get started, talks about what we do. You'll find that we practice what we preach. You're not signing up for some big commitment. It's going to be a little mini project that's going to be stupidly cheap.
Awesome. Oh my goodness, Craig, so many golden nuggets in such a short amount of time. Thank you so much for coming to the show and just completely sharing everything that you've gone through, being so vulnerable. There's so many takeaways in that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a delight, Kay.
Thanks for listening to Make Your Mark podcast at www.makeyourmarkpodcast.com. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you get this and every other episode that comes out. We have lots of great stuff coming, so make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss it. And thank you in advance for all the reviews and comments. I appreciate it so much, and I look forward to serving you in next week's episode.